So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining. Hope everybody had a nice weekend. Before we pass it over to our presenters for today, just a couple quick things. If everyone can please remain on mute during the presentation so there isn't any background noise, that would be much appreciated. There's one button at the bottom of your screen that looks like a rectangle with an up arrow. Please do not hit that, as that will interrupt Alice's presentation this morning. If you have any technical issues, please put those into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and I'll do my best to help you through those. Please be aware that most times those issues stem from your own Wi-Fi or internet connection. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put those into the chat feature as well, and we will prompt Alice with those questions as they come in. And if anyone has dialed in via telephone today, please send me an email at mfrey@pjhq.com so we can make sure you get your MSR credits. We are recording this webinar again today, so if you ever need to refer back to it, it will be available on our YouTube channel shortly in the future. Before we turn it over to Alice, I believe Mr. Clark Lewis has a song prepared for this morning. Clark.
Yes, I do. Another song to honor our great country. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Thank you very much, Clark. That was wonderful. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Miss Alice Miller, our chair and a major champion. Alice, thanks for presenting today.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Clarky, thank you for that song. Everybody, my apologies. My webcam is not working, so you do not have to look at me this morning. I am wearing a white golf shirt and a blue, navy blue sweater, nothing too special. Anyway, we're going to dive right into it here. I've chosen to try to cover all of the relief rules today. The first two, 15 and 16, are free relief rules, and then 17, 18, 19 are the penalty relief rules. And I don't know that we're going to get through it all. I'll do the best I can, and if not, we will finish up probably with the unplayable ball on Thursday when Clark and I do our final session. But let's go ahead and get to it. We'll start with Rule 15. It's all about moving loose impediments and movable obstructions, and the last part of the rule is probably the little bit more interesting part about a ball or a ball marker that helps or interferes with play. So we're going to look at that. We have our purpose statement, and it's just going to cover how and when a player may take free relief. We can take relief from these things really pretty much all the time. We have a couple little exceptions, and they're not treated. Part of the philosophy is that these things are not treated as part of the challenge of playing the course, and we're normally going to be allowed to remove them when they interfere with play. Just a little bit of warning in the purpose statement. The player needs to be careful in moving loose impediments near the ball, unless it's on the putting green. On the putting green, you've got a kind of a free-for-all. But you have to be careful moving loose impediments near the ball, because if you cause the ball to move, there will be a little penalty situation for that. We're going to start with our definition of loose impediments. And as a couple of us have mentioned, I think understanding and applying the rules, knowing the definitions is just critical to being able to apply these rules. Sometimes the ruling that you may be asked by one of your guests or your members, it could be answered by the definition. Anyway, so for loose impediments, these are natural objects, and they have to be unattached. They can't be something growing, but it's any unattached natural object. We have some great examples here. It can be stones, loose grass, leaves, branches, sticks. Kind of a disgusting slide. They've got a dead frog here, dead animals, goose poop over here on the right. Loose impediments, you might want to make your caddy move those. And any unattached natural objects such as worms, insects, and similar animals that can be easily removed. And the mounds or webs they build, this is an interesting too. So the worm casts and ant hills, those are also loose impediments. And the last one is clumps of compacted soil. Probably the most common one would be an aeration plug. Those are loose impediments. But natural objects that are not loose impediments. So it's right there in the name. And so if anything's attached or growing, the player down here on the left, we have what looks like some dead grass, but if that grass is attached, whether it's growing or not, it's not a loose impediment. Things that are solidly embedded in the ground that can't be easily picked out. Like in the middle here, we have these stones. And in this picture, let me get my little pointer going here. So in this picture, we have some things that are loose impediments and some things that are. Some of these stones are sitting on the surface of the ground, or maybe they're just lightly embedded. And I know when I was working for the tour, kind of our standard was, can I flick it out with my fingernail? You know, so if you can flick it out with your fingernail, that's okay. If you have to dig it out with like a divot repair tool, a ball mark repair tool, then it is solidly embedded. And the one over on the right, things that are natural things that are sticking to the ball. Here we have a clump of mud, but probably a more common example would be loose grass clippings, you know, that are adhering to the ball. They are no longer loose impediments. Our special cases, just as a good reminder that sand and loose soil are not loose impediments. The only time you can move those would be on the teeing area or on the putting green, but they are not loose impediments. Dew, frost, and water are not loose impediments. Snow and natural ice can either be loose impediments, or if they're on the ground, they can be temporary water, and that's the player's call. But if they're not on the ground, if it's not on the ground, you know, it's going to be a loose impediment. If the snow is on the ground, such as in this bunker, this player can treat it as temporary water. Spider webs are loose impediments, even though they're attached to another object. So this is kind of a unique case. The poor spiders get no respect. Their habitat is not protected from anything. So even when spider webs are attached, that's an exception to our earlier part of this definition. They are still considered loose impediments. All right, when it comes to removing loose impediments, you know, we have a lot of rights. We're going to see a couple of restrictions, and then the risks that we have if our ball is moved when we remove them. So without penalty, a player can remove a loose impediment anywhere on the course and can do so in any way. They can use their club, hand, foot, brush the leaves away with a towel. You could use a leaf blower for that matter. When it says in any way, it means in any way. We have two exceptions here. And the first one is removing loose impediments when the ball must be replaced. And Tom Karpus has a great term for this. He calls it a restricted loose impediment. And so if a ball's been moved and has to be replaced, or if it's been lifted and has to be replaced on that spot, you can't move a loose impediment that if the ball were still in that position, it would likely have caused the ball to move. And if you do so, you're going to get a penalty stroke just as if you move the loose impediment with the ball sitting on top of it. That's going to imply, this exception applies both during a round and while play is stopped. We don't want any loopholes for the players while play is stopped to go tidy up, move loose impediments where their ball has to be replaced. Here's the interpretation that goes along with this. So this exception makes it clear that before replacing a ball, and again, replacing we're going to see is different than placing, but before replacing a ball, the player must not remove a loose impediment that, if moved when the ball was at rest, would have been likely to cause the ball to move. And again, the rationale is because when the ball's in its initial location, the player would risk the ball moving. So we're not going to let them move it just because the ball happens to be lifted at that point. However, when a ball is to be dropped or placed, the ball is not being put back in a specific spot, and therefore removing loose impediments before dropping or placing a ball is allowed. So when we have that relief area, and you know, we talked about that when we looked at our cats, it is one of our protected areas, but the relief area we're going to drop in, we can move loose impediments freely, no problem. And placing a ball is part of completing the dropping procedure. So even though you've done your 2 drops and it's rolled out of the relief area, if there's a loose impediment there that you want to move, you can do that, even if that's where you're going to place your ball. And of course, we have our exceptions that this is not going to apply to a loose impediment that it ends up being moved as a result of marking the spot of the ball, lifting, moving, or replacing the ball, causing the ball to move. So we still have those exceptions. If players, lifting their ball to identify it and they move a loose impediment, that's fine. They don't have to put the loose impediment back. What they can't do is let's say the loose impediment still could affect their ball when they replace it. They can't continue to move it out of the way, but the movement that occurs as a result of marking the ball, lifting it, that sort of thing is okay. The second restriction, we saw this when we looked at Rule 11.3, you can't move loose impediments to affect a ball in motion. So if the ball's not in motion, move the loose impediments to your heart's content. But if there's a ball in motion and moving that loose impediment could affect it, we cannot touch it. That's going to be a penalty situation. We're going to look at this video of Camilo with this exact situation. He's hit this little pitch shot up to the top of the hill. It's rolling back down. He looks at his caddy like, oh, brother. Flicks this divot out of the way, stands there, hand on hip, waiting for the ball to come back to him. And what he didn't realize, even though, the ball, we don't know if the ball would have hit the divot or not, but the fact that he moved that loose impediment while the ball was in motion earned him a two-stroke, a general penalty, in this case, a two-stroke penalty. Okay, so if the ball moves when you're removing the loose impediment, what's going to happen? The ball's going to always be replaced on its original spot. This is, I think, every player's worst nightmare is pine straw. It's almost like pickup sticks. I know when I played on courses with pine straw, I didn't dare touch anything within about a 2-foot radius because it seems like they're all interlocked. So there you saw this player trying to remove a piece of pine straw, and the ball moved. They replaced the ball, and that is a one-stroke penalty for the ball moving. Again, we're going to estimate the spot if we don't know it, but we're always going to be replacing on a spot. Anywhere except the putting green or the teeing area, we're going to get a penalty stroke. Those are our exceptions. We know that we can move things there with no penalty. So if you're in the general area, a bunker, or a penalty area, you can remove those loose impediments around your ball, but you just need to be very careful. We have our exceptions about during search. Some of you might have, if you've had your coffee already, might have been thinking, well, what about during search? So here's our little laundry list of when it's okay to move the ball during search. Even, you're moving loose impediments, your ball is under some leaves possibly, or you think it might be under some leaves, and you're kind of digging around and the ball moves and the loose impediments move. That's no problem. Anytime, like we said, when you're allowed to lift the ball, accidental movement on the putting green is always exempted from penalty, and anywhere on the putting green while you're applying a rule. So if you're, measuring or looking to take relief, or you move a loose impediment that causes the ball to move, you're okay in those special situations. Our penalty statement: if you incorrectly substitute a ball or play from a wrong place, you're going to have the general penalty. Movable obstructions, second part of the rule. You're going to start with some definitions. So obstructions are any artificial object, any man-made object, even this pile of ice here in the middle. Somebody's emptied their cooler out and you got these ice cubes. That's manufactured ice. That is an artificial object by definition. Typical ones, we have the cart path, we have the bunker rake. Here we have a drain inside the bunker area, water fountain, little decorative fence. All of those things, artificial, are all under the category of obstructions. And then our exception, we've seen this kind of reiterated throughout the rules, integral objects and boundary objects. Those start out as obstructions, but the committee then defines them. They define this retaining wall as an integral object. They define the boundary of the course with this chain link fence. If they didn't define the course with the chain link fence, let's say they defined the boundary of the course with the edge of this road, this chain link fence would still be an obstruction. But because it is being used to determine the boundary, it is no longer an obstruction, no relief from those things. We have the two categories of obstructions, movable and immovable. This rule we're going to look at in 15, we're going to look at movable, and in Rule 16, we're going to look at immovable. This is always on the test. You guys probably don't need to know it unless you have a fence with a gate in it, but if part of an immovable obstruction, such as a gate, meets the definition of movable, that part can be treated as movable. or is treated as movable unless the committee says otherwise. All right. Movable obstructions, which is what we're going to deal with in Rule 15. The two criteria, you have to be able to move it with reasonable effort and without damaging the obstruction or the course. So all of these things, the towel, the golf cart, the rake, they can all be moved and won't cause any damage. When it gets into something like a signpost, maybe a directional signage, if it's just a little stick in the ground one, easily movable. If it's one that's, kind of like a gate post or something that's really dug into the ground and you've really got to wrestle it to get it out and you might damage it in the process, it is not movable. Usually it's pretty clear cut. Again, if part of an immovable obstruction meets these two standards, that part can be treated as movable. That would be the example of the gate if the gate were not locked. Interesting exception that's important in our area, we have a lot of these stacked stone walls. So if the movable part of the immovable obstruction, i.e. a loose stone, is not meant to be moved, then it's not a movable obstruction. So if we have these stacked stone walls and there's some loose rocks in here, you are not allowed to move those. Whether that's a boundary wall or not, that could be just a decorative stone wall within your facility. And again, the committee can, if an obstruction is movable, like this fence, these fence pieces, this isn't a boundary fence, this is just a nice decorative historic fence within this property, the committee may want to define it as immovable so that the players don't dismantle it in order to have a clear swing. All right, back to the rule. This rule is going to cover the free relief that's allowed from artificial objects that meet the definition of movable obstructions. As I mentioned, we're not going to talk about immovable. We're going to talk about that in our next rule, Rule 16. And so without penalty, just move it out of the way. You can move it whether it's on or off the course. You can do it in any way you choose. You just pick it up and move it. Again, we have our two exceptions here. This is going to sound a little familiar. First one is the tee markers not being moved. Clarky talked about that, and we talked about that in 8.1. Those tee markers, when you're playing from that teeing area, are not to be moved. And the second one goes along with what we just saw in the loose impediments. You can't deliberately remove a movable obstruction to affect a ball that's in motion. This is the same rule that we saw for the loose impediments. So 11.3, whether it's a loose impediment or a movable obstruction, if there's a ball in motion, you just want to leave it alone. Here, Corey Pavin's hitting a bunker shot, hits it out, kind of chunks it a little bit. The caddy's walking over to get out of the way, and then, this rake is in the way. The caddy reaches down thinking he's doing the right thing to remove the rake. Well, that's a double whammy for Corey. I mean, he needed to leave that rake right there. If the ball hits it and deflects off it, that's fine. By moving it, Corey gets the general penalty for that, and he's also going to have to take penalty relief out of that penalty area. Big double whammy. All right, if a player's ball moves when you move the movable obstruction, there's no penalty. You're just going to replace the ball. Always going to replace it on that original spot. If you don't know it, you're going to estimate it. Real common one here, bunker rake. Ball's up against a bunker rake. You move the rake, the ball moves. You just replace it. Going back to that though, anytime we're replacing, just a reminder, you don't get to substitute a ball. So when we see the penalty statement at the end for an incorrectly substituted ball, this is where that could happen. I move the bunker rake, the ball moves. Instead of replacing that original ball, I go in my bag and I get a fresh ball and I substitute because, there are a lot of rules that allow us to substitute. But when we're replacing the ball on the spot, we have to use that original ball. So that's one of the ways you could get into a penalty situation here. Or you don't replace it, now you're playing from a wrong place. All right, if the ball is in or on a movable obstruction, and this we're going to look at two scenarios, anywhere except on the putting green, and then we're going to look at the putting green. We're entitled to free relief, and this happens a lot at tournaments. You can have spectators and, sitting on a blanket. This towel situation, this little example is fine, but we don't usually find towels laying around on the golf course. But it could be any type of a movable obstruction. It could be a candy wrapper. It could be a spectator sitting on their blanket, and the ball comes to rest on that movable obstruction. I had one time where my ball came to rest on the TV cables that were running along the rope line. So when it's sitting on something, the ball doesn't have a spot on the course. So we're going to have to move the movable obstruction. And when we're not on the putting green, we're going to drop a ball, and the relief area is going to look like this. The reference point is going to be the estimated point right under where the ball was at rest on that movable obstruction. So we determine our reference point, and then we're going to have, our 1 club length relief area. Again, almost always our relief areas, whether it's free relief or penalty relief, are going to be 1 club length. However, the 2 times that we get the 2 club lengths are the 2 lateral relief options, penalty relief options. One's for penalty area, the other's for a ball that's unplayable. And we'll see that either later today or when we get back together on Thursday. But so it's always going to be that 1 club length. We do have a limit. It has to be in the same area of the course as the reference point, and it can't be near the hole. So we're pretty familiar with all of that. And we're going to drop in that area. On the putting green, same thing. We're going to lift the ball, remove the obstruction, but now because we're on the putting green, we're always going to be placing. And again, the thing to note here, in both of these situations, because now we're doing a relief procedure, we can substitute a ball. When the ball was moved by removing the movable obstruction, we had to use the same ball and put it back on the spot. But now that we're using a relief procedure, we can substitute a ball. Kind of a little nuance that, one of those exam record type situations. This is very unlikely. I hope you all saw that ball go in that trash can. So again, this is very unlikely. The ball goes in the trash can and you have knowledge or virtual certainty. I think my first thing would be to look through the trash can, but if it's full of disgusting trash and garbage, the player might not want to do that, and they are allowed to take free relief. And they're going to be able to do that by determining, okay, the ball goes in, you take the spot where the ball crossed over the edge going into the movable obstruction, and then right below that on the ground is going to be your reference point. So the ball crossed right here, directly below, there's your reference point. Now you're going to move those trash cans out of the way, and then you're going to determine, you're going to have that as your reference point, use your 1 club length, no nearer the hole, as your dropping area. Here's our penalty statement. Again, incorrect substitution or playing from a wrong place. That can happen because we fail to replace the ball if it's moved, or we get confused, and when we're replacing the ball, we think we can substitute and we can't. But if we are dropping in a relief area, we are always allowed to substitute. Give you guys a second to see if you have any questions on the first part of the rule. First 2 parts, I should say.
There haven't been any submitted yet.
Okay. Now we're going to get into 15.3, and this is, I won't say it's more involved, but I mean, hopefully everything in 15.1 and 15.2 is pretty familiar to folks. Now we're going to talk about a ball or a ball marker that helps or interferes with play. A helping ball can only be on the putting green. So 15.3a is only going to apply to a ball that's at rest on the putting green, not anywhere else on the course. And if a player reasonably believes that a ball on the putting green might help anyone's play, and usually that's because it is serving as a backstop. What we're talking about here is backstopping for the most part. Some of you may be familiar with that because that was came to light on the PGA Tour a few years ago. Players who were doing this thinking they were just being a good guy, or just they didn't want to take the time to walk up and mark. But if you think a ball is going to help, ball on the putting green is going to help another player. If it's your ball, you can go and mark the spot and lift it. And if it belongs to another player, you can require that player to mark the spot and lift it. And actually, well, we'll get to an interpretation here, but you actually need to do that to protect the field. In stroke play, a player who's required to lift may play first instead. And here we go into the backstopping thing. If 2 or more players agree to leave a ball in place to help any player, and that player then makes a stroke with that helping ball left in place, each player who made the agreement gets the general penalty, 2-stroke penalty, because this is only in stroke play. We are expected in stroke play, every player in the field is expected to protect the field. And if you're doing this in your group, the rest of the field doesn't have this to their advantage. So we really want to deter this, and the rules do that. This interpretation makes it pretty clear that in stroke play, if 2 or more players agree to leave a ball in place on the putting green, remember, helping ball has to be on the putting green, and the stroke is made with that helping ball left in place, each player who made the agreement gets 2 penalty strokes, regardless of whether or not they know that such an agreement is not allowed. However, if the players know that they're not allowed to make such an agreement and they still do it, they're going to both be DQ'd because they're agreeing to deliberately ignore a rule. So it's pretty stiff penalty. The rules really want to deter players from doing this backstopping thing, or in stroke play, again, if you're in match play, it's different. You control what's going on in a match, but in stroke play, the rest of the field isn't there to protect their rights. You're expected to protect the field. Okay, ball anywhere on the course interfering with play. So notice that interfering can be anywhere. It's not just on the putting green. Helping is only on the putting green, but interference can be anywhere on the course. And it's when another player's ball at rest might interfere with a player's area of intended stance or area of intended swing. Could be when it's on or close to the player's line of play, so that, there's a chance that the player's ball in motion could hit that ball. And the final one is it's close enough to distract the player in making the stroke. This is one place where mental interference, is going to allow that player to say, you know what, that ball really bothers me there. Could you please mark it and lift it and get it out of my way? So mental interference, if I think, I'm going to be hitting this putt from the fringe and Clarkie's ball is right there. And, I think that even though it's not on my line of play, it bothers me. It's like distracting. I can ask him to lift that. So if you believe another player's ball anywhere on the course might interfere with your own play, this is a critical part of this. The player whose turn it is to make the stroke can require the other player to mark the spot, lift the ball. This is one of those few instances when you have your ball in your hand and you can't clean it. We've gone over that before. There's just 4 cases, and this is one of them. And then once that player's played their shot, you're going to replace your ball on the spot. And an interesting little caveat here, if the other player does not mark the spot before lifting or cleans the lifted ball when not allowed, he or she gets 1 penalty stroke. So here you are being the person that's trying to get the ball out of the way. If you absentmindedly, clean your ball, you're going to get a penalty stroke. Know the rules and save yourself from those ticky-tacky procedural penalties. Again, in stroke play, you can play first if you choose to. The player is not allowed to lift his or her ball under this rule based on their own belief that the ball might interfere with another player's play. So here, Clarkie's going to be the one to play first, and I think my ball interferes with his. It's like, oh my gosh, that would drive me crazy if that ball were there, so I'm going to get it out of Clarkie's way. Well, guess what? Unless Clarkie asks me to lift my ball and get it out of the way, I'm going to get a penalty stroke for lifting my ball in play. It's only up to the player. It's completely up to the player whose turn it is to play whether another ball interferes, not the player whose ball is involved that thinks they might be interfering. For a ball marker, we're not going to distinguish. This can be anywhere on the course. If a ball marker might help or interfere, a player may move the ball marker out of the way if it's his or her own. If it belongs to another player, just require that player move the ball marker out of the way. And again, we're going to use the same reasons that we just looked at for the helping and interfering ball under 15.3A and B. So use those same standards. And if the ball marker must be moved out of the way to a new spot, the important thing to note is it must be measured from its original spot. Typically, this is on the putting green, probably our most common example. We move the marker over by using our putter head to span it over 1 or 2 putter head lengths. But you must measure. You can't just lift it up and move it. You have to measure it. But interestingly enough, the lifted ball, when you're going to go to replace it, you can either move the ball marker back, which I personally think is the best practice and what you should do, or you can directly replace the lifted ball. Little nuance. I've never seen anybody try to do that because I think it would raise some eyebrows, but the player has their choice either way. Penalty for this is general penalty. We also have some penalties here. Penalty is going to apply if a player makes a stroke without waiting for a helping ball or ball marker to be lifted. Like this player wants to lift her ball, mark and lift her ball because she thinks it could help this player. Let's say this is in, match play, or this player's playing from off the green, and this player doesn't wait. They go ahead and play without giving that player a chance to lift that helping ball. And if you become aware that another player intended to lift, or had required someone else to do so. Same thing. This is even would be more unusual, I would hope, was that, if you refuse to lift a ball or move the ball marker when required to do so, and then the other player goes ahead and makes a stroke, so you can't go, no, I'm leaving it there. You have to comply with the other player's request. Again, there's our penalty statement. It's very possible to play from the wrong place or to incorrectly substitute when operating under these rules. Here's our little exam question, quiz question to help test our knowledge. And again, whether you plan to take the exam or not, I think if you're kind of in charge of the stuff at your club, your facility, in terms of running events, and people, everybody expects the pro that we are the committee at our various facilities. And if you want to kind of brush up on your knowledge, and more importantly, for me, I find my blind spots by doing these little exam questions, because it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I've got to go look that up. All right, here's our question. The player is going to get a penalty in which of the following circumstances? We're assuming that the player's ball and any object described are always in the same area of the course. Okay. Looking for the penalty situation. Removing a movable obstruction in a bunker that caused your ball to move. Nope, we know that's fine. We get to move rakes all the time, and there's no penalty for that. Lifting a loose impediment on the putting green that caused your ball to move. Causing the ball to move and lifting a loose impediment, those usually go together, but we know the putting green is one of those exceptions, so no penalty there. Marking and lifting her ball from a bunker because she decided on her own it interfered with another player's ball, which was away. Yeah, that's a problem, because we just saw that it's not up to me to decide that my ball interferes with the shot that Clarkie's about to hit. It's up for him to decide that. And we'll check the last one anyway. Moving the ball marker on the putting green because she thought it would help her opponent aim her putt. That's absolutely allowed. If you think your ball marker is going to help somebody else, you are entitled to move it. There's our answer C. Okay, that's Rule 15.3. And any questions on that or the earlier part of the rule, go ahead and ask Matt. I'll boot up Rule 16.
I think you can roll with it, Alice.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Matt. Hopefully this stuff is pretty familiar to everybody. This is a bigger rule. Rule 16 has a lot more parts to it, and it especially has a lot of definitions. So be prepared for the definitions. But I do think it's one of the rules that we use, at least the first part of it, we use it all the time. So it gets used a lot, and it's a good one to have a refresher on. Purpose statement just tells us that this rule is going to cover how and when a player may take free relief when there's interference by an abnormal course condition or a dangerous animal condition. And again, the philosophy behind this is that these conditions are not treated as part of the challenge of playing the course, and free relief is generally allowed except when we're in a penalty area. Normally, we're going to take relief by dropping a ball in a relief area based on the nearest point of complete relief. And we're also going to look at the relief procedure for a ball that's embedded in its own pitch mark in the general area. We do not use nearest point of complete relief for embedded ball. So here's 16.1 is the biggest part of this rule. It has the most slides and the most going on, and you can see it has these 6 parts to it. I'm going to start out with some definitions, and again, these are crucial to applying this rule. And the first one we're going to go start with is abnormal course condition, which is right in the name of the rule. And this is just an umbrella, this is an umbrella term, and it includes all 4 of these defined conditions. And we'll look at these one by one. These are each separate conditions, but the relief procedure is the same for all of them. So they fall under this umbrella of abnormal course condition. Animal hold, GUR, immovable obstruction, temporary water. Animal hole is any hole dug in the ground by an animal. Makes sense, straightforward enough. Except, here's our exception, and this is a good exception to know, except for holes dug by animals that are also defined as loose impediments. So our poor worms, insects, spiders, and crustaceans, they get no respect. Their holes are loose impediments and can be moved. We're not going to get relief from that otherwise. This used to be, I think, I guess it was in the definition before, but it's just good to know that the animal hole is kind of a shorthand. It's not going to list all these things out, but you just know that the hole includes the loose material that the animal dug out, any worn down track from the animal going in and out of the hole, or our friends the gophers, any area on the ground that's been pushed up because the animal's tunneling underneath. Those are all considered part of the animal hole. Animal, any living member of the animal kingdom other than humans, and includes mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates. So we're not saying that these poor worms, insects, and spiders aren't animals. We're just saying that you're not going to get relief from their holes. Ground under repair. Any part of the course the committee defines to be ground under repair, whether by marking it or otherwise. I love this photo. I think this is PJ Boatwright. He was not known to put down a lot of white paint, but he is in this situation. So it includes all the ground inside the edge of the defined area, and any grass, bush, tree, anything that's growing within that ground under repair and is rooted in the defined area. And the part that gets a little tricky is it's any part that extends out. Like if there's a branch hanging out over outside the ground under repair, that is still part of the ground under repair. Interestingly enough, though, when such an object is attached to the ground or is below the ground outside the edge of the ground under repair, it's not part of it. So these tree roots that are growing outside the defined area, those are not part of the ground under repair, but any branches that are overhanging are. And when this rule changed, quite a while ago, it just seems so odd. So if you're standing out here and you have a limb overhanging that interferes, you would get relief. And that didn't seem fair at the time when they made this rule change, but that is the way it is now. So if you're standing, if your ball's out here, and you're not standing, you have no interference from the ground under repair, except for a limb overhanging that's up in the air in your backswing, you would get free relief. But if you're up next to this tree root that happens to be outside the ground, now if I were marking this, I would put all those tree roots in, but that's just me. And this is a nice category to know. It's going to include the following things, even when the committee doesn't define them as such, because the committee is not usually going to define these things. You've got the hole made by the committee or maintenance staff in setting up the course. Here we have a penalty area stake. That stake gets pulled out. The hole that's left, that's a hole that was made by the maintenance staff.
Hey, Alice, we had a question come in.
Sure.
Why is a flower bed considered to be ground under repair?
That's a good question. It's not necessarily, that picture wasn't the best picture probably. The ground, if the club, the greenskeeper, the pro, if they don't want players going into that flower bed, they probably are going to either have it be ground under repair, or more likely they're going to have it be a no play zone, which we're going to cover later in this rule. So that was not my favorite picture for that. It's not by, if it hasn't been declared like in the local rule sheet or something, it is not ground under repair, and you can go in there and play your ball. Most courses are going to protect their beautified areas and their flower beds, but that's a great question, because that was not marked as ground under repair, and it was not marked as a no play zone. So it was really not the best example of that. Great question. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
They should have put a little white line around that to use it in that example. Maybe I'll tell David Stabler that and see if he wants to hear. I bet he already knows, actually. Okay. Again, hole made by the committee or the maintenance staff in maintaining the course. So if you have a removed tree stump and there's a big hole left, even though they haven't put a line around it, that would be ground under repair. Here they're working on either their irrigation system or their drainage system. You don't have to put a white line around that for that to be ground under repair. The one thing that's not included when we think about a hole made by the maintenance staff, and this question will come up, are aeration holes. Aeration and the aerification process is an important part of maintaining a golf course, both on the greens and the fairways and the tees, and particularly on the greens. That even on the fairways, players are always asking, can I get relief from that? And if you have, significant aeration holes and you're having an event, you might want to, there is a model local rule, but just in general, those are not considered ground under repair. Grass cuttings, leaves, and things piled for later removal. Here we have some stuff piled by this cart path that's to be removed. That is ground under repair, even though it hasn't been defined as such. But if we have natural materials piled for removal. Oh, just reminding us that natural materials piled for removal are also loose impediments at the option of the player. But materials left on the course that are not intended to be removed, like here they've put some kind of, grass clippings or something down in this bare area. That's not ground under repair unless the committee defines it by putting a white line or some stakes around it. Animal habitats, such as birds' nests, that it's so near the player's ball that the player's stroke or stance might damage it. We want to protect these animal habitats unless they're, insects and spiders, then we don't care so much. But birds' nests, these kind of things are ground under repair by definition. Again, here's our poor animals that are defined as loose impediments, our worms and insects. We are not protecting their habitat. All right, the edge of the ground under repair should be defined by one of three ways: stakes, lines, or physical features. So when we're going to use stakes, the edge of the ground under repair is the line between the outside points of the stakes at ground level. So it's going to be the outside point of the stakes. And the stakes are inside the ground under repair. A good way to remember this is the stakes are part of what they define, and that's going to be true of our penalty areas and our GUR and our boundary stakes, for that matter. The stakes are part of what they define. When lines are used, the edge of the ground under repair is the outside edge of the line, and the line itself is in the ground under repair. Again, the lines are part of what they define, same as the stakes. When using physical features, here's that same picture that we didn't care for, such as a flower bed or a turf nursery, the committee should say how the edge of the ground under repair is defined. Like you could say on your local rules for your course or for your facility that any landscaped areas are ground under repair. Edge of it's defined by, in this case, it would be, where the mulch ends, the nice sharp edge where the grass ends and the mulch begins, whatever. You could, when it has a nice sharp distinct edge like this, you can define it by its features. Otherwise, if it's indistinct, you would want to mark it with some stakes or a line. If you are using a line, the line takes precedence, and the stakes really have no meaning other than to show that it is a ground under repair area. And this is good to show a player. I especially like this with penalty areas, but even with ground under repair, let them know that there is a ground under repair area over here, because they can't really see this line from a distance until they get to that area. Immovable obstructions. Any obstruction that cannot be moved without unreasonable effort or without damaging the obstruction of the course and otherwise does not meet the definition of movable. We saw that earlier. Again, the committee may define any obstruction to be immovable. You might want to do that with this little decorative historic fence here. Temporary water. This is a good one to know. Get lots of questions on this when you're working events, because players do not like hitting out of soft, mushy earth. But by definition, temporary water is just any temporary accumulation of water on the surface of the ground. It could be puddles from rain, could be overflow, it could be irrigation water, whatever, that's not in a penalty area. So obviously, we're supposed to have water in a lot of penalty areas, and there's no such thing as temporary water relief in a penalty area. But key points here when you're trying to make these rulings or these determinations, that water has to be seen either before or after a player takes a stance. So you've either got to have visible water around the ball, visible to the naked eye, or visible around the feet after the player takes a stance. Notice this little phrase, without pressing down excessively with his or her feet. I heard one instructor say it's the stance, not the dance. And I can't tell you how many times I've had players squish up and down and go, see, there's water. So it's not enough for the ground to be merely wet, muddy, or soft, or for the water to be momentarily visible as the player steps on the ground. We can all draw up water if we step down hard enough sometimes. The accumulation must remain present either before or after the stance is taken. So you'd have a player take a normal stance, see if the water settles. And trust me, if there's any water visible, I'm going to get the player out of that situation. But if there's no water visible, it's just going to be play hard out of the soft, mushy earth. As a player, we do not care for that. Here we have some exceptions, or what they call special cases, just letting us know that dew and frost are not temporary water, that snow and natural ice can either be loose impediments, or if they are on the ground, temporary water. That's at the player's option. We saw that back in Rule 15. And manufactured ice is always going to be an obstruction. Manufactured ice is man-made, not part of temporary water. different relief for that. All right, here we get into our rule. It's going to cover free relief that's allowed from interference by any 16.1 is any one of these 4 conditions. Our animal holes, GUR, immovable obstructions, temporary water. Those are part of the category of abnormal course conditions. Each has its separate definition, but as I mentioned earlier, we treat the relief procedure as identical for all 4 of these. This rule is not talking about movable obstructions. We looked at that back in Rule 15. That's where you have to go for that. And just that constant reminder that boundary objects and integral objects, you do not get any free relief. Players do ask. All right, one last big definition here that's just critical to applying this rule and a couple other things within this rule, but especially to applying 16.1. Nearest point of complete relief is going to be the reference point for taking free relief from only these 7 rules. I mean, there's some other local rules too, but abnormal course conditions, those are the 4 things that fall under that umbrella term. Dangerous animal condition, we're going to look at that later in this rule. That's our 5th one. A wrong green, we didn't see that. That's in Rule 13. Or no play zone, which we'll see in this rule in Rule 17. So out of the 30-some relief procedures in the rules of golf, only 7 of them use nearest point of complete relief. And notice embedded ball is not in here. As we're going to see, embedded ball does not use nearest point of complete relief. Anyway, this nearest point of complete relief is going to be the estimated point where the ball would lie that is nearest to the ball's original spot, but not near the hole. So obviously the left side of this cart path for this player who's playing to this green is closer than the right side. It's in the required area of the course. If this is in the general area, the nearest point of complete relief has to be in the same area. And the condition does not interfere with the stroke the player would have made from the original spot. So a lot of times, I'll ask a player, what kind of shot would you hit if this cart path were not here? And they'll say, oh, I'm going to hit a low punch under the tree or high draw or whatever. And that just gives you kind of an idea of what they're going to do. I mean, sometimes most of the time you don't need to do that. It's obvious they're in the cart path. They just want to know which side is the closest. But if you're in doubt, you can ask them what kind of shot would they play if that condition were not there.
The nearest point of relief is the spot the shortest distance away from where your ball lies, either left of, right of, or behind it, that isn't closer to the hole, and where, if your ball was there, you could make a stroke at it without any interference to your resulting lie, stance, and swing.
That's a nice little video that kind of shows that, and this can be kind of confusing to players because they which direction do I go? They know they have to have complete relief, but it can kind of be a close call, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's going behind it is the closest point. But that's how you want to evaluate where the nearest point of complete relief is. And it says that estimating this point requires the player to identify the choice of club, stance, swing, line of play, etc. that they would have used, but then it goes on to say that they don't need to simulate the stroke by actually taking a stance and swinging with the chosen club. It's recommended, it's a best practice, and if you're a referee or a rules official, there are a lot of situations where you will ask the player to do that. Hey, would you grab the club you think you're going to play this with and just go ahead and set up so I can see, you will use that to help you. And as a player, I'll do that for myself just to make sure I'm going in the right place, but it's not required. It makes it sound like it's required, but it's kind of a best practice. You should do it. Get you off the hook if there's any question. Nearest point of complete relief relates solely to the particular condition from which relief is being taken. It's the nearest point, not the nicest point. I can't remember which instructor said that at one of my rules workshops, and it's like, I've remembered that ever since. It's the nearest point, not the nicest. And it can be in a location where there's interference by something else. And I've had this happen. You drive up to a ruling, and a player's standing near the cart path and has her ball in her hand. Right away, it's like, uh-oh, she picked her ball up to take relief before she, really determined where the nearest point of complete relief was. And now, all of a sudden, it's not so nice, and she doesn't get to go on the side she thought. So you do want to be careful about picking your ball up before you determine that nearest point.
The nearest point isn't always the nicest point. In this case, the player's nearest point of complete relief from this path is under the tree. not to the left of the path in the clear. So it's a good idea not to lift your ball before figuring this out, because sometimes the best option is to just play the ball as it lies.
Yeah, playing off a cart path for most players, even amateurs, is not a hard shot if you're not worried about scratching your club, and that can often be your best option. All right, if the player takes relief and then has interference by another condition from which relief is allowed, you may take relief again by determining a new nearest point of complete relief from the new condition. And relief must be taken separately for each condition, except that once you've done this, once from each condition, if it becomes reasonable to conclude that continuing to do so is going to result in this continued interference by one or the other, now you can go ahead and treat them as one and take relief from both at the same time. So you can't do that until even though it seems obvious to you, I'm going to go from this cart path to this temporary water and back and forth. You have to go through each procedure once, and then you can conclude that you can take relief from both. And there used to be a decision on this that was called the ping pong decision, and it's just to keep you from going back and forth multiple times, but it does say that you've got to go through the procedure once for each of the two separate conditions. Okay, that was a big definition. Any questions on that?
Yeah, we had one come in. Can you talk about cart paths, dirt, stones, wood chips, and pavement? What are the differences in relief for those?
Yeah, great question. So, when it's an artificially surfaced path, that leaves a little bit of room for interpretation, like what's artificially surfaced mean? And usually, if it's asphalt, packed stone, whatever, that's pretty straightforward. That's going to fall under the definition. But if let's say it's just a worn track that has maybe a little bit of scattered stone and it's just dirt, or, there's wood chips or whatever, usually the committee would define that and say, they'll define exactly what the immovable obstructions are, and they would include all of that, anything that's been an artificial thing put down. And if we have a stone path, like a gravel path, and some of that gravel's escaped off to the side, usually you'll treat that as just loose impediments. However, if it's kind of embedded in there, the committee would be probably in their right mind if they kind of marked, maybe they put a line, tying the whole thing in so that players would know that this whole thing is part of the immovable obstruction. But without any marking, if you just have a dirt path, it's just play hard. It's just bare dirt where carts have been driving. But if it's artificially surfaced, whether it's with wood chips or stones or whatever, that's always been considered an immovable obstruction in my experience, although there could be a little gray area around the edges where the stuff is leaked off. Does that help? And you can just move the stones. If it's loose stones or mulch, you can move those as loose impediments even if they're part of that path. If that doesn't clear it up, we can talk about it more when we're done, but I hope that helps. Okay, back to the rule. When are we allowed to have relief? Interference exists when any one of these is true. Player's ball touches, is in or on the abnormal course condition. And try to picture all four of those different types of things as we go through this. Animal holes, ground under repair, immovable obstructions, and temporary water. If the abnormal course condition physically interferes with the player's area of intended stance or area of intended swing, and only on the putting green, and the ball has to be on the putting green if an abnormal course condition on or off the putting green intervenes on the line of play. So the only time we get line of play relief is for a ball that's on the putting green. The one that you get asked about a lot if you're refereeing a tournament is this irrigation control box. And, the player, like let's say this player's swing did not interfere, but that box is just right dead on the line of play. And I think players usually know the answer, but they're just hoping for a different outcome. And so they'll ask, and no, there's no relief for line of play in this situation. On the putting green, yes. This could be a sprinkler head. This could be temporary water. There could be some ground under repair. You are going to get relief for your line of play. I've had questions about this from players, even at the tour level. If the abnormal course condition is close enough to distract the player, but does not meet any of the other requirements, in other words, it doesn't interfere with the stance, it doesn't interfere with the swing, or the ball's not sitting on it, there's no interference by definition under this rule. So in this case, mental interference, being a distraction or mental interference, that's you just have to play hard. Okay. And you're allowed to have relief when both the abnormal course condition is on the course and the ball is anywhere on the course. So we're not going to get relief for abnormal course conditions that are out of bounds. And this last one, again, just a reminder, we touched on this, I think, in some other rules, but if the ball is anywhere on the course except in a penalty area, the only way we're going to get out of a penalty area, and we're going to talk more about this when we get to Rule 17, you can either play your way out or you're going to take penalty relief under Rule 17. There's going to be no free relief within the penalty area except for two really unusual circumstances, which is a dangerous animal and maybe a no-play zone. But for the most part, you're never going to get out of a penalty area for free, that's for sure. And you're not going to get away from things like bridges, sprinkler heads, temporary water, animal holes. No relief inside of a penalty area. Players will ask that. That's a question you'll get from a player. I've had a player where I drive up and she goes, I just want to know her ball's on the cart path going over the penalty area. It's like, where's my relief? And you have to say in your nicest bedside manner, you don't get any. And that's not always a popular answer in a penalty area. No relief. We've seen this before. When it's clearly unreasonable to play the ball because of something else. You know, balls, it's in these tree roots. You can't get a club on it. You're not going to get out of jail free under Rule 16.1. If the interference exists only because a player chooses a club, stance, swing, or direction of play that's clearly unreasonable. Here, this player's got a little pitch shot, sets up, decides to take this big wide stance, drop the foot back. Yeah, that's unreasonable. He's not going to, maybe he didn't like the lie of his ball and he thought by taking a drop I can get a better lie, but no, that's unreasonable. You're not going to get out of jail free with 16.1. Okay. If the balls, we're going to look at the different places, general area, putting green and bunker. We have a little bit different relief procedures for the three, and these will all be familiar to you guys. So if it's in the general area and there's interference, the player may take free relief by dropping the original ball or another ball. Remember, we can always substitute. And here's our relief area that should start to be pretty familiar by now. The reference point is going to be the nearest point of complete relief in the general area because, remember, our ball is in the general area for this part of the rule. And we're going to have that one club length, but we are going to have some limits. The relief area must be in the general area. We know it can't be closer to the hole, and there must be complete relief from all the interference by the abnormal course condition. So have to have complete relief from your stance, lie, your ball, area of your intended swing. In a bunker, if there's interference by an abnormal course condition, the player may either take free relief or penalty relief. Here, really common thing after heavy rain, have temporary water in a bunker. And we're going to use the same procedure that we just used for the general area, but now the reference point and the relief area have to be in the bunker. Okay. If there's no such nearest point of complete relief in the bunker, you can still use this relief option using the point of maximum available relief. And we're going to look at the definition of this because this doesn't come up very often, but as we'll see, this is only if there's no nearest point of complete relief. You can't say, oh, I'm going to use, because I don't like where my nearest point is, I'm going to use my max. No, point of maximum available relief is only available as a choice if there's no nearest point of complete relief. So we have this ball in the temporary water in the bunker. There's no nearest point that's not near the hole or not outside the bunker. So we can use maximum available relief. I've had to do this before. This is not any fun as a player, I'll tell you that. And it's going to be the estimated point where the ball would lie that's nearest to the ball's original spot, not near the hole in that spot. It's in the required area of the course, in this case the bunker, where the abnormal course condition least interferes with the stroke that the player would have made from the original spot. So what that looks like, and again, it does, in this case, you probably do want to grab a club and try to, estimate all this stuff because this is going to be pretty dicey for the player. If you're making this rule, and you will definitely have the player select a club, and a player, he or she should also do this and kind of look at the stroke because otherwise it's going to be tough to make this accurate determination. What we're going to do is going to compare the relative amount of interference between the lie of the ball and the player's area of intended swing and the stance, area of intended stance. Relative amount of interference. And on the putting green only for the line of play. So what this looks like, you know, it might be where the ball will be in shallower water and the player's going to stand in deeper water. That's what I would choose for sure. It can be where the ball is in deeper water than where the player will stand, affecting the line swing more than the stance. I don't know many people that would choose that, but you know, it doesn't always have to be temporary water. This is just the example here. Player can choose. And on the putting green, the maximum available relief is going to be based on the line of play, and it could be where the ball needs to go through, you know, shallower water but for a longer period, or deeper water for a shorter stretch. Player does get a little bit of choice on that. Now, if we have an abnormal course condition in a bunker, in addition to taking our relief inside the bunker, we are allowed to go outside for one penalty stroke. And the way we do this is we go back on the line, and this is a great option. You know, I know in our league, some of our weekly member play, especially for some of the ladies 9-hole group, if they're playing the course that doesn't have very good bunker drainage, they love the fact that they can take one stroke and go out of the bunker. They don't have to drop inside the bunker. But anyway, the relief area is going to be based on a reference line, and we're going to go back through the ball from the flag to draw the reference line. Okay, and then the player is going to choose the reference point. It can be anywhere on that reference line. They can go back as far as they want. Ideally, the player is going to indicate that point with a T. They don't always do this, and very rarely do they do this, actually. And if they don't use the T, if they go ahead and drop without having chosen this point, the rules are going to choose it for us. The rules are going to have the reference point be on that line, the same distance from the holes where the drop ball first touched the ground. So the rules will pick the reference point for you if you don't put that T down. Size of the relief area is going to be 1 club length. Can't be near the hole, and we know that. That's our common language. And it may be in any area of the course, but if it is in more than one area of the course, in other words, you have 2 areas of the course located within that 1 club length reference point, now the ball must come to rest in the relief area where it first touched the ground when you dropped it. So here, if you dropped it in the general area, this shaded section is going to be your relief area. And if for some reason you chose to drop in the penalty area, the shaded section is going to be your relief area. Okay. This is the model local rule E12 that we've mentioned a number of times. I know Tom Karpus mentioned it in our very first presentation. And if you don't have this in effect at your facility, I would strongly recommend it. It really gets players, you know, off, I'm not going to say off the hook. It keeps from trapping players. And I wouldn't be surprised if this language goes into the rules revision for 2023. I don't know if it will or it won't, but it wouldn't surprise me. So please put this rule in effect. It's in effect at the section level on all the tours. And basically what it says is that there's no penalty if you drop it in the relief area required and it comes to rest outside the relief area. You're okay as long as the ball is within 1 club length of where it first touched the ground. And for all of you that are, you know, been around the rules for a while and around golf for a while, you know, this is our old language of how we used to be able to take back on the line relief. So ball first touched the ground right there. This whole 1 club length area from that point is now part of the relief area, and that ball would be in play. The player's not going to be in a penalty situation for playing from a wrong place, which they would be if this model local rule were not in effect. So please consider adding that. And it's definitely back in the committee procedures. I'm pretty sure it's in the original guide, but it's definitely in the updated online stuff. Okay, on the putting green, a little different story. Player's ball on the putting green, there's interference by an abnormal course condition. Temporary water, probably the most common one. Player's going to take free relief by placing the original ball or another ball. Again, this is a relief procedure. You can substitute a ball now. And you're going to put it on the nearest spot of complete relief using the procedures that Jeff talked about back in Rule 14. So, you know, the ball was here. There's the nearest point of complete relief. This is a left-handed player, so they don't, their stance was already over here, and that's where they're going to place their ball. Interestingly enough, the nearest point, this is only on the putting green, the nearest point of complete relief must be either on the putting green or in the general area. It's very possible, and I've had it happen a number of times in making rulings and helping players find their nearest point of complete relief. It was over here in the general area on the fringe, and they're still going to place the ball. That always surprised the player. The one player, she knew, she goes, I think I can go off the green, right? Because there's no relief. And I said, yeah, you absolutely can. And I said, you can also, you're still going to place the ball. And she goes, really? Because players were so conditioned not to ever place their ball off the putting green. But in this case, you can go off the putting green and you're still going to place it. It has to be in the general area, though. We're not going to make you go into a bunker to get this nearest point of complete relief. And again, just like we had before in the bunker, if there's no such nearest point of complete relief, the player may still take this free relief using the point of maximum available relief. And that too can either be on the putting green or in the general area. All right, moving to 1.1e. Now we're going to talk about relief for a ball that's not been found, but it's in an abnormal course condition. So, our little example here is pretty far-fetched, but in your mind, think this could be temporary water. This could be, ground under repair that has soft, mushy earth and maybe some higher grass. It could be an animal hole, all right? So if the player's ball hasn't been found and it's known or virtually certain that the ball came to rest in or on that abnormal course condition on the course, okay, ball wasn't found. It flew through that little hole in this outbuilding, and we can't find it because the door is locked. But yet we have knowledge or virtual certainty that it's in there, because in this case, that would have to be eyewitness testimony in my book. You can use this relief option instead of going back under stroke and distance. You can take relief under any one of those first three categories we saw, depending on whether the ball's in the general area, the bunker, or the putting green. I can't imagine, well, no, I shouldn't say that. There could be an animal hole on a putting green. Okay, I won't go there. But what we're going to do is going to use the estimated point where the ball last crossed the edge of the abnormal course condition as the spot of the ball for purposes of finding the nearest point of complete relief. So here we got our little, wooden outbuilding here. Going to determine the spot where the ball last crossed the edge of it. In this case, it's an obstruction, but this could be, again, temporary water. This could be ground under repair. This could be an animal hole. Then we're going to find the nearest point of complete relief starting from that point. Okay. Once the player puts another ball in play to take relief in this way, the original ball is no longer in play and must not be played. Even if it's found on the course before the end of the 3-minute search time. Remember, we put this ball, we had knowledge or virtual certainty. We had that 95% likelihood. And so we've gone ahead and proceeded under the rule, and we've proceeded correctly because that was our knowledge and virtual certainty we had at that moment. So the original ball is no longer in play. This is common sense. If it's not known or virtually certain, again, you'd have to convince me by eyewitness testimony that that ball went in that little hole. If you don't have that, then you must take stroke and distance relief under 18.2, which is our ball lost rule. Okay, no play zone. This picture is a good example of a no play zone, I think, more so than ground under repair. But in each of these situations, the ball must not be played as it lies. And we have it when the ball's actually in the no play zone, and the second scenario is just the ball's outside, but the stuff in the no play zone interferes. So if a player's ball is in a no play zone in an abnormal course condition in the general area, bunker, putting green, remember we're talking about there are no play zones in penalty areas, but that's covered in Rule 17. We must take free relief. The relief is free, but it's mandatory. Just like a wrong green, it's mandatory relief. In a bunker, we're going to take the same relief that we saw earlier under 16.1c, which can be either staying in the bunker or taking the ball outside. And usually if it's in a bunker, it's going to be, it might be a bird nest or something like that. It's not going to be the whole bunker. And on the putting green, you're going to proceed under the relief for putting greens. Okay, the ball's outside the no play zone. but the no play zone interferes with the area of intended stance or area of intended swing. We're just going to take relief the way we did earlier, depending on where the ball is located. You also have the option to take unplayable ball relief. I tried to come up with a scenario where I thought a player in their right mind would do that, and I couldn't think of one. But so now you're just going to use the same, okay, depending on which direction you're playing. Let's say your stance, maybe your foot's going to be in this. You do have to still take relief. Again, very similar to a wrong green. I mean, even if you're standing on it, you must take relief. For a ball in a penalty area, we're going to cover that under 17.1e. And I would say that the most common no-play zones are going to be in courses that have environmentally sensitive areas in a penalty area, or it's going to be those beautification, those flower beds and those beautified areas on our courses that we just don't want players, going in there and, whacking up the flowers. So those are the two most common ones in my experience. But I also have seen, little isolated bird's nest as part of a no-play zone. There's our penalty statement. All right, here's our little question for 16.1. This is the biggest part of this rule for sure, and probably the one that we use the most. Which one of the following is true? We're looking for a true statement when a player intends to take relief from an abnormal course condition. Remember, this can be any one of those four things that fall under that umbrella term. The nearest point of complete relief must always be located in the same area of the course as the ball's original spot. Well, when you first read that, that sounds true, but that little word always is a red flag to slow down. And as we saw, the nearest point of complete relief for a ball that's on the putting green might be in the general area. So we know that that one is not true. When a player's ball is in a penalty area and the player has interference from a sprinkler control box located in the general area, the player can use Rule 16.1 for free relief in the penalty area. Nope, there right away, I know that one's not true. Or take penalty relief. That part is true. You can take penalty relief outside the penalty area, but we are not getting any free relief when we're in the penalty area. Player's ball is on the putting green. The player takes free relief from temporary water. The player either places a ball at the nearest point of complete relief, or if not available, at the point of maximum relief. That sounds true to me. Let's look at the last one just to be sure. When a player's ball is in a bunker and complete relief in the bunker is not available, the player must take penalty relief outside the bunker. Again, must, that's a strong word, and we know that they can use maximum available relief. So the answer should be C. If anybody has any questions on those, I went through that pretty quickly, but
Yes,
Yeah.
Alice.
Go ahead.
One came in under Model Local Rule E12.
yes.
It's the restriction of requiring the ball come to rest in the same area of the course as where it would first touch the ground still apply, or is the only condition the one club length?
It depends on which back on the line relief you're taking. So, different rules, like the penalty area rule, we can, as long as we don't drop in the same penalty area, we can drop wherever. But for the abnormal course condition, it has to be in the same area of the course. So it depends on which rule we're applying. Model rule, local rule E12 can be applied to different relief procedures for different rules. And those rules will specify whether the ball has to be in the same area of the course or not. Does that make sense? Like, we're not going to take, in this course, in this situation, we're dealing with abnormal course conditions. We're not going to make a player go from, the general area into a bunker, for instance.
Right.
So it's however the rule reads, and I'm trying to think of the examples. In some rules, yes, it could be either area of the course. Other rules, it has to be in the same area, and it's just specific to that rule. So the E12 is generic to all back on the line relief procedures. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Okay, second part, 16.2 deals with dangerous animal conditions. And this exists, we have our little internal definition here. Dangerous animals such as poisonous snakes, stinging bees, alligators, fire ants, or bears are near a ball and could cause serious physical injury to the player if he or she had to play the ball as it lies. And this question always comes up about snakes. And, I had one attendee at a workshop, and I totally agreed, said, even if a snake's not poisonous doesn't mean it's not dangerous, because they all bite. And I would agree with that. As a kid, I got bit by garter snakes a couple of times, but unless a snake was small enough for me to flick it away with a club like the size of an earthworm, I'm going to personally consider every snake dangerous. And you know what? If you ever go up to a ruling and that official says, nope, I don't think that's a poisonous snake, then you just ask the official, oh, would you please remove it for me then? And you might get a different ruling. So I think this should just read snakes personally, but I'm editorializing. Let's take a look at this video. This is a good one.
Over at 6 here, yeah. Smiley Smiley Kaufman, you don't want to be wearing white in that particular situation. We saw Cody Gribble yesterday tap this little guy on the rear end. Something of a different reaction there from the considerably more sensible Smiley Kaufman.
Entertaining little video from the PGA Tour. Okay, when the interference, you can always take relief, and this is one of those things, one of the few things where those two situations where I said you might get free relief within a penalty area. So you can take relief from a dangerous animal anywhere on the course, no matter where the ball is. And the only restriction, if it's just unreasonable to play the ball because of something else, something other than the dangerous animal, like the ball is in a lie where you were going to not be able to play it anyway, then you get denied relief. Or if you choose that strange stance or swing or whatever, trying to create the interference, that's not going to work. So anywhere except the penalty area, we're going to operate under B, C, or D. General area, bunker, putting green. Okay, we got those three different similar but separate procedures for those areas. We're going to treat this just like an abnormal course condition in this case. And then in a penalty area, we're still going to operate as if we were in the general area. It's just the only difference is that the nearest point of complete relief and the relief area must be in the penalty area. They must stay in the penalty area. And you can always go ahead and take relief outside the penalty area, obviously. And if there's, I don't know if this is in a interpretation or a clarification or what, but if there's interference by the dangerous animal where the ball will be played after taking this penalty relief, or if that animal is like where you're going to go ahead and take your drop out of the penalty area, but where you're required to drop is still near that dangerous animal, you do not have to drop. You can just go ahead and continue. You take your one stroke, you get out, and you continue to take relief now that you're out of the penalty area. And depending on what area of the course you're in, you can go ahead and find your free relief to go on top of your penalty relief. And this is, again, internal definition. Now the nearest point of complete relief means the nearest point that's not near the hole where the dangerous animal condition does not exist. So it could be a ways away, depending on which direction the gator is faced. I have seen officials chase gators off of banks and putting greens. I'm not sure I would ever do it. Penalty statement, play from a wrong place, get the general penalty. Dangerous animal condition, one of only 2 times where you're going to get in a penalty area, be able to take free relief. You do have to stay within the penalty area, but very unique situation. All right, now embedded ball. This is another fairly frequent rule situation, and this rule changed a little bit in 2019. You'll look at our definition first. It has to be the player's ball that's in its own pitch mark, and it has to be a result of the previous stroke, the stroke the player just made, and part of the ball has to be below the level of the ground. Doesn't necessarily have to touch the soil, though. There could be grass or loose impediments between the ball and the soil. And when we think of the level of the ground, one way to think of that is, okay, where the roots stop growing and it turns to a blade of grass, that's the level of the ground. Where the roots stop and the blade begins, that's the level of the ground. Okay, to have embedded ball relief, we must be in the general area. It's only allowed when a player's ball is embedded in the general area. There's no relief for this rule anywhere else on the course. Obviously, on a putting green, you can, you mark the ball and repair the ball mark, but there's no embedded ball in bunkers. There's no embedded balls in penalty areas. Now, when is relief not allowed in the general area? So if the ball's embedded in sand and it's in a part of the general area that's not cut to fairway height or less, So here we have a sandy kind of a waste area, off in the rough or whatever you want to call it, and this ball is embedded in sand. So this is the one exception where you would not get relief for an embedded ball in the general area. However, if it's a sand-filled divot that's in the fairway cut, you would get relief as long as you know it's in its own pitch mark. And then we have this, I shouldn't say that was the only exception. The other exception is a general principle that if interference by anything other than the ball being embedded makes it unreasonable, clearly unreasonable to play the next shot, you know, the player's not entitled to relief. And you would ask a player, if a player tried to weaselly on this one, you'd say, well, what would you do if your ball were sitting there and it weren't embedded? Oh, I'd have to take an unplayable. And it's like, well, there's your answer, okay? This one's very clear cut. All right. This goes back to our definition. It's embedded only if it's in its own pitch mark, key component, and it's made as a result of the player's previous stroke. And part of the ball has to be below the level of the ground, even though it might have some grass there in between the ball and the soil. If you can't tell for sure if the ball is in its own pitch mark or pitch mark made by another ball, you can treat it as embedded if it's reasonable to conclude that the ball is in its own pitch mark. And this would be a little bit tough without eyewitness testimony, but in this case, this was a shot played from somewhere down the fairway, and the ball's over here in the shortcut, the rough, the step cut, whatever it might be. And you saw your ball fly there. You didn't see it bounce, even though you might have been hundreds of yards away. You didn't see it bounce at all. And you go up there and, okay, there's no other pitch marks around. Yeah, you could conclude that you're in your own pitch mark. Ball's not embedded if it's below the level of the ground as a result of anything other than the previous stroke. So stepping on it, no, out of luck there. But ball has moved and you are going to replace it, so you really aren't totally out of luck other than maybe getting a penalty stroke. If the ball's been driven straight into the ground without becoming airborne, I mean, don't see this very often, but I've seen some beginners do this on the driving range. I've never seen it on the golf course. It's a tough trick shot to pull off. And the final one is the one to take note of. If the ball was dropped and taken relief under a rule, any of our relief procedures that require dropping in a relief area, and it embeds in its own little pitch mark, there is no longer relief for that. Before 2019, there was relief, but remember, we were dropping from shoulder high. And now that we're dropping, and a lot of officials thought this could be an issue, but so far that hasn't been the case. The fact that you're dropping from knee high seems to have taken care of this. Anyway, so there's no relief for dropping in a relief area and having that ball in bed. Haven't seen it happen yet. I'm sure some officials have, but it has not been widespread like we thought it might. Okay, player's ball is embedded in the general area. We're going to allow the player to take relief by dropping an original ball or another ball in this relief area. You can substitute the ball. Let me go back to that. And we're going to look at a nice video that really shows this rule in play. But again, just to remind everybody that for an embedded ball, we're not using nearest point of complete relief. That rule does not use that as the reference point. The reference point is always going to be the spot right behind where the ball is embedded. And so this does a couple things. One, you're never going to end up back in the same condition because where the ball is embedded is closer to the hole. And it just keeps the ball as close as possible to where, you know, it actually embedded. So that's your reference point's always going to be directly behind the ball, different than what we saw with the abnormal course conditions. Got a great video here that really illustrates this rule.
Number 4. Oh, no.
Mr. Evans bladed it right into the lip of the bunker.
It's the ball of Ben Evans. I get a feeling he's going to need a ruling.
Yes, he is. It's just waiting for you.
So his ball is embedded in the general area. There's his line of play. His reference point, notice, it's right behind the ball, and in this case, it's actually in the sand. It doesn't have to, the reference point is usually going to be in the general area, but in this case, it's right down here in the sand, right behind the ball. His relief area is going to be 1 club length. Notice the line of play, the flag is over here. So his line of play is at an angle. Fortunately for him, he's got a little angle here. You got the one club length, has the limits of can't be nearer the hole than the reference point, and it must be in the general area. So that leaves him with this little tiny wedge. At least he has a wedge.
It was a free drop for Ben Evans at the fourth. Yes, he got away with that.
So it's very possible. I haven't seen it happen. I've worked tournaments where it came close. It's very possible that depending on the configuration of this bunker, the player might not get relief for an embedded ball. In this case, Ben did. He had a little wedge over here, but he was fortunate that the line of play was off at an angle and the way the bunker was configured. But it is possible to not get relief in that situation. This is just calling out the fact that the committee can put a local rule in effect that says relief is only allowed in the fairway cut or less. This is the way the rule used to read prior to 2019. It was only fairway height or less, and you had to have the model local rule to include the rest of the general area. And in 2019, they flipped that, which I think was a great change. And I can't imagine, I'm sure there are situations where the committee might want to limit it just to the fairway height, but that has to be done by local rule. Otherwise, it's for the entire general area. And again, it's possible to play from a wrong place. You know, somebody mistakenly takes their nearest point of relief over here to the side when we're not using nearest point of complete relief for embedded ball, but they get confused and they drop over here somewhere. Now you're going to have played from a wrong place and be in a penalty situation. Remember that for embedded ball, it's that spot right behind the ball. Okay, in which one of these circumstances is free relief not allowed when a ball is embedded in its own pitch mark? Ball is embedded in the bare dirt, edging lip 1 inch above the sand in a bunker. We just saw that. That's a free relief situation. The ball is embedded in a seed mix filled divot in the middle of the fairway. Yep. Embedded in sand in the fairway. We saw that that's okay. Ball is embedded in ground under repair in long grass in the general area. Yep, that's okay. We're in the general area. We don't have that local rule in effect. The ball is embedded in fairway height grass inside the red line of a penalty area. This is the one that can fool people because as soon as you see fairway height grass, you're thinking general area, but you have to just underline the fact that you're in a penalty area. And we know there's no such thing as an embedded ball in a penalty area. So the answer is D. It's our embedded ball. Okay, last part of this rule is being able to lift the ball to see if it lies in a condition where relief is allowed. And you have to have some reasonable belief. You can't just walk up and go, I'm going to check and see if my ball is embedded. You have to have, reasonable belief that it could be embedded or that it could be sitting on a movable obstruction, any one of the abnormal course conditions actually, or embedded. And you can't decide that without lifting the ball. Maybe you think there's a French drain that runs through here. So you have this reasonable belief. The player is entitled to lift the ball to see if relief is allowed. You have to mark the spot before you lift it. We saw that in Rule 14. If you're going to lift a ball that's going to be replaced on the spot, you have to mark it. This is one of those 4 situations where the ball is not allowed to be cleaned. Normally we have the ball in our hand, we can clean it, but this is one of those 4 exceptions. And of course, except on the putting green. And if you lift it without having the reasonable belief, you're going to get a penalty stroke for lifting your ball in play. Unless you're on the putting green. And I always have to have that little caveat. Or if relief is allowed and the player takes relief. Like let's say Tiger was sure that his ball was embedded and he goes ahead and lifts it without marking it, or he was sure it was on a French drain or something, then he doesn't have to mark. But you better be sure that you're going to get relief. Okay. If you didn't mark the spot, and then you're going to get the penalty stroke for not marking. Also, if you choose not to take the relief, like you think you're going to take relief from, let's say, a French drain, and you lift your ball, yep, I've got interference by the condition, but all of a sudden you start looking around and go, oh, I think I'd rather hit it from here because the rough's not as high. Well, it's the same situation that you're in on the cart path. If you lifted your ball before knowing, where you were, if you decide to put it back and play out of this condition that he's in, he can go ahead and replace it and do that, but it's going to cost him 1 stroke because he did not follow the procedure for marking the ball. Incorrect substitution or playing from the wrong place. General penalty. If he lifts that ball and sees that he's not entitled to relief and he goes ahead and substitutes a new ball, that's an incorrect substitution. Most players are not going to do that. So we're always allowed to lift it to see if it lies in a condition where we might be entitled to relief. Okay, that's the end of Rule 16. That's been an hour and a half. Matt, we're going to take maybe a 5-minute break, and I'm going to probably try to cover Rules 17, and I might need to save 18 and 19 for Thursday, if that's okay.
Yeah, perfect. Let's see everybody back here in 5 minutes at 10:35.
Refresh your coffee, and we're going to tackle penalty areas. Okay, Matt, I'm having problems getting this other one up. What am I doing wrong here?
Alice, what did you say? I think he rounded the men's room.
Are you seeing my screen right now?
I am.
Okay, good.
It says 2019 rules of golf and then rule 17. Looks good.
Okay,
Awesome.
there we go.
You're good. They'll be back shortly.
Yeah, I'm going to take a quick break too.
Good idea.
Matt, I'm ready whenever you guys are.
Roll with it.
All right. Okay, gang, we're going to jump into penalty areas, and we just looked at the free relief procedures under 15 and 16, and now we're going into penalty relief procedures for these next 3 rules, and we probably will only get through penalty areas today. And the next 2 after that, the stroke and distance, ball lost or OB, or Rule 19 unplayable, are fairly short rules. So hopefully Clarky and I can finish those up on Thursday. Looks like a short rule, but it does have some different parts to it. We'll just get to it. Purpose statement, it's a very specific rule just for penalty areas. And these can be bodies of water or other areas defined by the committee, and where a ball is often lost or unable to be played. So it doesn't have to have water in it. The committee can define other areas. You're going to get a penalty stroke and have specific relief options to get out of that penalty area. Here's our definition. Any body of water on the course, whether or not it's marked, is going to be a penalty area, okay? If it's a lake, a pond, a little creek, river, whatever, open, any kind of open water course, even if it doesn't contain water at the moment, that is by definition a penalty area with or without stakes on it. But we also have, new to 2019, another great rules change. Any other part of the course that the committee defines as a penalty area. And courses kind of were doing this anyway, so you can have any kind of bad country now and define that as a penalty area. I know the deserts out in the Southwest quite often will do this. It's one of the 5 defined areas. I won't spend too much time on that. We know that it can be yellow or red. Different relief options. 2 under the yellow stakes that we'll look at. 3, get an additional option under red penalty areas. And when I'm working with my juniors or my beginner players, because I know this helped me when I was a kid, my pro said, you know, when it's red, because I was having trouble remembering which is which, he says, when it's red, stop and think, because you're going to get another option. So that might be helpful for your juniors or your beginners. Again, if it's not been marked by the committee, we know this is a penalty area. It's a water, big pond, lake of water, and it's by default going to always be red now. Anything that's not marked that is a penalty area, water has to have water in it, be a waterway, is going to be red. Edge of a penalty area extends both up and down. All right, so all the ground and anything else, natural objects, artificial objects inside the edge of the penalty area are going to be part of it. The boundary of it goes up and down. And if an object is both inside and outside the edge of the area, and this is a real common one, a bridge, a cart path leading up to the bridge and then a bridge going over it, only the part of the object that's inside the edge is part of the penalty area. It's only this red part. This is outside, that is inside. It should be defined by stakes, lines, or physical features. We'll look at all 3 of these. Red stakes are very common. This is what we typically use on our courses. And when it's defined by stakes, the edge is going to be the outside point of the stake at ground level. The stakes themselves are inside the penalty area. Remember, we said the stakes are going to be part of what they define. That's true in penalty areas. With a line, it's the same thing. It's the outside edge of the line, and the line itself is in the penalty area. And when defined by physical features, very common with, like I said, with the desert courses, it could be a beach, could be a retaining wall. The committee should say how the edge of the penalty area is defined. A lot of courses have these, you know, tall naturalized grasses, fescues, whatever they are, and it would be okay for the committee to say where the tall grass starts. That's a defining physical feature, but that should be spelled out. So if that's what you have, this is Chicago Golf Club, I think, if that's what you have at your course, you know, put that on the little local rules notice at the starter shack. And when it's defined by lines or features, physical features, stakes can be used, but they really don't have any meaning other than to show a player that, hey, there is a penalty area over here. They don't define the edge if the physical features or the line is being used. Again, if it's a body of water and it's not defined by the committee, how are you going to know where the edge is? And it's kind of defined by its natural boundaries, like where the ground starts to slope down to form the depression that can hold the water. And the arrows here kind of point to what would be reasonable. It leaves a lot for interpretation, but, you know, for everyday play, that's fine. Players can, you know, they can figure that out amongst themselves. But I Ideally, if you're having any kind of an event, you would want to have some stakes or lines down here. An interesting little choice the committee can make: if an open water course does not usually contain water, it could be a drainage ditch or a stormwater runoff that's normally dry, the committee may define that as part of the general area. They may say, you know, the drainage ditch on the left of number 7 is part of the general area. Not too many would do this, but if it's only in a real heavy rainstorm that's going to have water, maybe you just want the players to play that as an immovable obstruction, like a drain. Committee has that choice. Okay, we know that the red and yellow stakes are going to affect our relief options. Now we're going to jump into the rule. A reminder that you can stand in a penalty area to play a ball that's outside the penalty area, and this includes after you've taken your relief. You know, I think new players, or even players that are just in their tournament mode and not thinking right, they take their relief from a penalty area, and quite often you do have to stand in it, because especially when you're taking this lateral relief option, you've got just a wedge to work with, and the ball is in play in the relief area, but they have to stand inside, and that's okay. But they sometimes will ask because they're thinking about the free relief where you have to have complete relief, and they get the two mixed up. Definitely can stand in the penalty area. Ball's going to be in the penalty area when any part of it lies on or touches the ground or anything else inside the penalty area. Even though this is on a retaining wall, you know, it's inside that line, it's inside the penalty area. It can be above the edge. Remember, the edge of the penalty area goes up and down, so even though ball is elevated off the ground in this these reeds or whatever they are, it's still in the penalty area. If part of the ball is in both the penalty area and another area of the course, the rule refers us back to 2.2c, but I'm going to just give you the short version. The penalty area is always going to claim the ball. We have that hierarchy that, well, first of all, the rule says the ball has to only lie on one part of the course. So if it shares two areas, and the best example is this penalty area and bunker, because this quite often happens at courses where the bunker runs down right to the water, and you've got to put a line to define it. So if it's on the line, the penalty area is going to take precedence over the bunker. It's going to claim the ball. Same thing be true if the penalty area was right up at the edge of the green. I've heard somebody say that they've seen that. I have not personally seen it, but same thing would be true. So what are our options? You know, you can play the ball as it lies without penalty. You're going to use the same rules that you used in the general area, really. I mean, you can move loose impediments, you can take practice swings, you can ground your club, do all that stuff. So you got two choices. You can try to play your way out, or you can take penalty relief. To get outside the penalty area, it's always going to be penalty relief, and it's going to be done under this rule, under Rule 17. And we do have the exception about interference from a no-play zone in the penalty area. If the ball's in it, you're going to have to just take penalty relief. Which one of the following is false? We'll go through this quickly. Bodies of water are penalty areas by definition. Yep, that's true. Areas that are not bodies of water, where balls are often not found, and if not may be marked as penalty areas by the committee. Absolutely true. If a bridge is partly inside the lines defined the penalty area and partly outside, the entire bridge is treated as in. No, that's false. We saw how that bridge and that cart path can be split by the edge of the penalty area. And if it lies partly inside and outside, it's treated as in the penalty area. That's true. The penalty area is going to claim the ball over another area of the course. Answer is C. All right. Relief for a ball that's not found, but it's in a penalty area. Okay, we have that knowledge or virtual certainty that the ball came to rest in the penalty area. We saw it go in, or the grass is so short that the only place it could be is in the penalty area. You can, obviously you can't play it now because you can't find it, but you can take penalty relief, okay? And once you put another ball into play, again, this is an important little point to make. You have the knowledge or virtual certainty, you put another ball in play to take relief, the original ball is no longer in play and must not be played. Even if it's found on the course before the end of the 3-minute search time. Hey, I just found your original ball. You know, that's okay. You still are this ball is still in play. And if a player's ball is in a penalty area, whether you see it in there or you have the knowledge of virtual certainty, you're going to have these relief options. These are going to be very familiar. Okay, for one stroke, we can do stroke and distance. This is a par 3. Player's gone back to the tee to play again. take our back on the line relief, or we can take our lateral relief if it's a red penalty area. We get that third option. And if any questions through this, you guys stop me because this should all be pretty familiar.
Yeah, we did get one
Okay, go
a
ahead.
minute ago, Alice. For drainage ditches that are concrete, are they still considered penalty areas?
Okay, if it's a drainage ditch and it's just if the committee, if it's well, it's kind of up to the committee really. It's if it doesn't hold water, you know, it's just a runoff area, it's probably going to be an immovable obstruction. If it's marked as a penalty area, or if the committee has said the drainage ditch left of number 7 is a penalty area, then you treat it as a penalty area and there's no relief from that obstruction inside the penalty area. So it can be, and that gets a little, there is some gray area there, Matt, because you can have French drains that are kind of gravel filled, drainage things. Those aren't penalty areas, but they are always abnormal course conditions. So, or they should be unless the committee decides otherwise. So that would be the distinction.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, here's our stroke and distance relief that we're familiar with, depending on where you played from. Going to go back from where the previous stroke was made. Our back on the line relief, going to drop the original ball or another ball using the back on the line procedure. Back on the line, again, just a reminder, it always has a reference line because we use the reference line to determine our reference point. Then the reference point is chosen by the player, has to be on the reference line, has to be farther from the hole than the estimated point. Go back as far as you want. Hopefully you put down a T if you're a knowledgeable player. And if you don't, again, same thing that we had back in Rule 16. The rule's going to choose it for you. The rule's going to say, okay, this is where it dropped. I'm going to go to the nearest point on the reference line. That's going to be the reference point. Always going to be 1 club length from that reference point. Here's our limits. Can't be near the hole. Now in this case, it can be in any area of the course except the same penalty area. You know, when we looked at Rule 16 and that question came up, if I'm taking relief from an abnormal course condition in the general area, my relief area has to be in the general area. If it's in a bunker, it has to be in a bunker. So now with the penalty area relief, it can be in any area of the course except the same penalty area. And that's true whether we're going to be using our standard relief area or our Model Local Rule E12. And here's where we get the language. If it's in more than one area of the course located within 1 club length, the ball must come to rest in the area, same area of the course that the ball first touched. Here's our Model Local Rule that we've already talked about. So I'll go through this a little bit quickly. Yep, so in this case, you know, we could be going into a different area of the course for the penalty area relief. Just can't go back into the same penalty area. Again, strongly recommend that Model Local Rule. All right, for red penalty areas only, we're going to stop and think because now we have a lateral relief option. The reference point is chosen for us. It's where the ball last crossed the edge of the penalty area. We used to say where it last crossed the margin. That's what was drilled into my head as a young player, but where it last crossed the edge. And this is going to be one of those 2 times that we have a 2 club length relief area. This and unplayable relief that we'll see in Rule 19. All the other relief, free and penalty, is going to be a 1 club length area. Can't be near the hole, any area of the course except the same penalty area. And if more than one area is located within 2 club lengths, it's going to come to rest in the same area that the ball first touched when dropped. So maybe you're dropping from a penalty area and there's a bunker and there's general area. That's when this would apply. The committee, you know, we used to have this equal distant margin option for red penalty areas, and that was the default. And now the default is that we do not have that, and in order to use the opposite margin for a red penalty area, the committee has to adopt a local rule saying so. And if your course, you know, has a hole that requires this, I mean, this is a good example here. There's just junk on the left. You might want to adopt this local rule. But in the absence of the local rule, There's no longer any equidistant opposite margin option. Here's our no play zone, okay? I'm trying not to spend too much time on this, but have to take relief from a no play zone. If the ball is in the no play zone, you just have to take penalty relief. This is common in some of the southern courses. They have these environmentally sensitive areas, and the whole penalty area is a no play zone. And if your ball's in there, you must take relief. And in most cases, that's what it's going to be. If it's in a penalty area, it's going to be the entire penalty area. If the no play zone on the course interferes with the stance or swing for a ball in a penalty area, not likely to happen, but you're going to have to still take relief. Penalty relief outside the penalty area or free relief in the penalty area. It's one of the few times when you're going to be able to take free relief in a penalty area, but it's only if you have interference for your stance or swing. If your ball's actually in the no play zone, you must go outside the penalty area for one stroke. Again, I like the way this reads. If this area even exists in the penalty area, chances are it won't. Going to be the nearest point of complete relief, 1 club length, and you must stay in the same penalty area where the ball lies. Okay. Again, if playing the ball is unreasonable because of something else, if you're in a no play zone, if there's a no play zone in a penalty area and your ball's in the penalty area, chances are you might not be able to play it anyway. And that's what this is saying. There's no get out of jail free card for no play zones. And if the no play zone is anywhere except the penalty area, that's what we covered back in 16.1F. Again, mandatory relief, but we're going to operate under Rule 16.1. If you play from within a no play zone, you've played from a wrong place. You're going to get dinged for that. All right, which one of the following is false? It's virtually certain a player's ball is in a penalty area when the player puts another ball in play under taken relief under Rule 17. Original's no longer, yep. That's true. We saw that in the one slide. The reference point used to determine a player's relief area for back on the line relief is chosen by the player. The reference points used for stroke and distance relief and lateral relief options are not chosen by the player, but established by Rule 17. That's correct. Player's relief area is partially in the general area and partially in a bunker. If the player drops in the right way with the ball first landing in the general area and then it rolls and comes to rest him, the part that's in the bunker, the player's ball is correctly put back in play. No, that is not true. That one is our false answer. If a player's ball lies in no play zone in a penalty area, the player must take penalty relief. Yep, the ball actually is in the no play zone, not just interference for your stance or swing. You must take penalty relief. That one's true. There's our false answer, C. Okay, now we're going to go to our regression rule. I know we don't have much time left, but this is important to note because you'll have some people ask, what do I do when I play from in the penalty area and then it goes to some place that I can't play it, what do I do? So you can always take, say your ball's in a penalty area, you feel heroic, you try to hit it and it goes deeper into the penalty area where you can't play it or maybe into another penalty area. For one stroke, you still have all your same relief options and you can also go outside the penalty area. So I call this the regression rule, okay? So here the player is hit it into the stuff, into the penalty area. They try to play a shot from within the penalty area, and it ends up at B, where they can't get a club on it. You can always take stroke and distance relief, and this used to confuse me because I associated stroke and distance with unplayable ball, and they're two different things. So you can always take stroke and distance relief. We'll see that when we get to Rule 18 on Thursday. So why any player would do this, I don't know. I've heard one instructor refer to this as the idiot drop. I call it the tin cup drop. But it is an option if you want to do that. You can always take your back on the line relief using the point where the ball lost across the edge. You can always take your lateral relief, again using the reference point is where the ball last crossed the edge. And the other thing you can do, which people don't think about, you can always go where you last played from outside the penalty area. And this, in some cases, might be your best option. What about when a ball in a penalty area is lost out of bounds or unplayable outside the penalty area? You got a great video here from Pebble Beach. Down on the beach, Ball went out of bounds. So after playing a ball from a penalty area, you may be required or you may choose to take stroke and distance relief. In this case, the player is required to take stroke and distance because that ball is out of bounds. And you can drop the ball in the penalty area, for your one stroke. And then you may decide you don't want to play for the drop ball from where it came from where it is in the penalty area. You can always go outside. You can take further relief outside the penalty area. You just have to remember that that's costing you that additional stroke. Okay. That's what it tells us here. You're going to get the penalty stroke for the stroke and distance and the penalty stroke for going outside the relief area for a total of 2. And you don't have to drop it in the penalty area. You can just go directly to taking your relief outside the penalty area for the total of 2 strokes. I think that's what this player is going to do. This is his original shot. It's his 3rd stroke to the par 5 18th at Pebble Beach. Feeling good about it. Pretty clean lie on the beach. Air mills it. Out of bounds. Comes back. So he's got 1 penalty stroke for his stroke and distance, but he does not have to go back down to the beach and drop it there. He can go right straight to taking the penalty relief for the penalty area. Directly puts the ball in play. Total of 2 penalty strokes. Now he's playing his 6th stroke. So this is one that on the exams, when they ask you to count up the strokes, it's very easy to forget to add that extra stroke. So we have a little reminder here that says, this does not fall under our discount, volume discount rule. If you get a penalty stroke for taking relief, whether it's out of the penalty area or stroke and distance, it's always applied in addition to any other penalties. So if you played from the wrong place, it doesn't wipe out your 1 stroke penalty. Okay, last part of this rule. I think we're just barely going to make it. And this is just that reminder again that when your ball's in a penalty area, there is no relief for any of those abnormal course conditions that we looked at in Rule 16. No animal hole relief, no ground under repair relief, no, immovable obstruction relief, which is what she would be asking for here. No temporary water, okay? None of that. No embedded balls in the penalty area. You can't have an unplayable ball in the penalty area. We'll reinforce that when we get to Rule 19 on Thursday. The only way you're going to get out is to play your way out or take penalty relief under Rule 17. Here's our little exception, the dangerous animal condition. You can get free relief in a penalty area away from the dangerous animal or go directly outside with your penalty relief. Okay, that's Rule 17, 1059. Gosh, Matt, I need a drink of coffee. My throat is getting dry.
Nice
It's
job,
great.
Alice.
Well, Clarky, we had I bit off more than I could chew, but I know that Rules 18 and 19, even though I had them prepared as part of this presentation, they won't take that long. So I thought maybe we would start with those on Thursday, and then maybe you can do Rule 23, which is our 4-ball format
Okay.
that I think everybody's interested in. And if we have time, I can present Rule 20 about, some of the committee stuff about, when our results final and all that. And if we don't have time for that, we'll just skip Rule 20.
Okay, so I'll take 23.
Yeah, is that okay? Are you good with that?
No, I'm good with that, sure.
Okay.
All right.
Now-
Does anyone else have any more questions before we sign off?
Alice, I'll give you a little question.
Sure.
To see how you feel about this. This has to do with loose impediments. Leave. Let's say we have a collection of leaves in a bunker. In fact, I think we actually have a picture in the presentation about this, and we see a ball there. But let's say we're pretty sure that the ball's in there, and I'm always concerned about how much we can do to locate that ball. I know it tells you that Rule 7 tells us really doesn't say anything about loose impediments to find your ball, except it says you can remove them as permitted under 15.1. And so I see that my ball's gone in there. I can't quite see it. How can I just gingerly remove some of those leaves? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Clark. And this is a great example of where I think the rules are kind of circular. one rule refers you to the other, and then the other rule refers you back to, to 7. So I think this could be a committee decision. I mean, fairly searching and fairly identifying your ball, we can move stuff. And if the ball moves, there's no problem. So I would feel comfortable having a player, okay, I know my ball is somewhere in these leaves. I'm pretty sure they could push the leaves away with their hand, with a club. You could even take a rake probably, but I'd probably have them do it with their hand or a club first and search for the ball. And then once the ball is found, they're entitled to lift it to identify it if they can't see their identifying mark. And if in the process of lifting it, a leaf gets moved out of the way, they're still fine. The one thing they can't do is, oh, okay, now I need to replace my ball. It moved a little bit. I'm going to have to replace it on the spot where it moved from, or I'm going to have to replace it on the spot that I lifted to identify it. Whatever was moved, it's okay, but you can't go any further. Now they become restricted loose impediments, and you can't further clean up that spot where you're going to replace your ball. But I think you can search pretty aggressively. I mean, maybe in that case, you wouldn't take a rake and go do it, but you could use your hand or a club and brush stuff away pretty aggressively, for sure.
Okay, I want to get your opinion about that. And I agree with it.
Thank you. Yeah, tell me if you don't. I need my parent checker there on the other end, Clarky, so I'm counting on you.
Hey, listen, I had one other question the other day. We were talking about in match play, an opponent moves the player's ball.
Yes.
Now the player, we know we can't make it. Well, I'll continue this way. He moves the player's ball. Now the player comes over and he said, you can't do that, but I'm not calling that on you. He doesn't just look away and say nothing. When do we get into a disqualification situation if that opponent who moved the ball says, yes, I agree. Okay, that's okay. We just won't apply that penalty. Is that a disqualification situation?
My understanding is, yes, it is. They've agreed to waive a rule. We can look at that when we get to Rule 20 on Thursday, and I'll make sure and look that up to make sure that's correct. But agreement to waive a rule is, that's a different situation. And I do think that's a DQ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a DQ if you do that.
Yeah.
I just think, how it is. You're looking at the thing. You can't do that.
Well, and it's interesting because sometimes when you have those DQs for these situations where you agree to waive a rule, I go, gosh, that seems awfully harsh. But again, the rules are trying to put in a strong deterrent so that players won't agree to waive rules. So yeah, I'll double check that, Clark. That's a good question, but I'm 99% sure that's a DQ penalty.
Okay, yeah, I think so too. Okay, very good.
Good deal. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm sorry my video's not working. I will work on that for next time. And Clarky, I look forward to Thursday. I think we can present those rules and then we can kind of go back and forth. We'll both have our open mics and we can, ad-lib it a little bit. And if you think of a story or a situation, chime in and we'll look at, I think Rule 20, if we can get to it, would help some of our pros when they're running their events at their club and a mistake is made, especially from the administrative side, and how, can we correct that and how long do we have to correct it, that kind of thing. But 23 will be of definite interest because I think every facility runs a lot of 4-ball competitions and it's a fun format and has its own little nuances.
Okay.
Matt, thank you for your help.
No, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll see everybody Thursday, hopefully. And just a quick reminder, if there are any teachers or instructors on here, we have a super speed in-person seminar scheduled for Monday at Radnor Valley. So if you want to register for that this week, please feel free. If you have any questions about that or any other education events, please give me a shout. And we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Clarky. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Alice.